But even it appears to embody an ideal that is unrealistic in a modern setting, I believe it holds the secret of a healthy society, trust in the consideration of our neighbours. I suspect there's always good reason to question the thoughtfulness of others. But Sister Shivani, a contemporary Hindu teacher, warns us against acting on that judgment. Your trust helps others overcome their nature, she says. Don't trust them because they are trustworthy, but so that they become trustworthy. It is clear that in the current state of emergency measures, acting selfishly ourselves will only compound the problems for all of us. Perhaps success in getting through this crisis will require us to behave in such a way that builds our trust in one another.
Thank you. That was Thought for the Day with Akindadi Das. The time now, 9 minutes to 8.
School is not just out, so too are exams. A-levels, GCSEs, SATs have all been cancelled in England. A decision is expected soon from the authorities in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. So what will happen to ensure that all that work, all that preparation, all that anxiety doesn't go to waste? The Prime Minister promised students yesterday that we'll make sure they get their qualifications. Well, let's hear now from two men at the centre of the decision-making here. Tom Buick is Chief Executive of what's called the Federation of Awarding Bodies, the collective voice of the UK's qualifications and assessment industry. Alistair Jarvis is Chief Executive of Universities UK. Morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Tom Buick, first of all, if I could, is there any form of test or exam that is possible in the lockdown conditions that are likely to continue throughout the time when we'd normally have exams?
Absolutely. And Nick, I think it's important just to stress for your listeners, as the Secretary of State said yesterday on the floor of the House of Commons, we will work tirelessly with the exams regulator, Ofqual, and indeed with the Department for Education to ensure that no student is penalised this summer. I appreciate that parents and students will be anxious about all the hard work they've put in, and there are already plans well advanced in the discussions we've been having with the government over the last 2 weeks to ensure that those exams are assessed and that students are not penalised. So there will be methods.
Let me just understand what you're saying, because my question was quite a specific one, and I know you wanted to make some general comments, which is there any form of test or exam that can take place if, in effect, most children are locked out of their schools? I think you're saying, yes, there may be. Is that correct?
Yes, because, obviously, because of the government's need to put in place these aggressive social distancing methods, there will be no communal examinations. But, of course, teachers already have ongoing assessments of pupils. There are, of course, the SATs, there's the Progress 8 measures, and, of course, there are mock examinations. So I think we can arrive at a solution fairly quickly, which is about internal assessment, which of course the teachers have the purview of that, but with some external moderation and support from the awarding bodies.
But to be clear, they wouldn't be taking the young people any new exam or test. That's not feasible in these conditions. What you'd be looking at is work they've already done, but not just relying on the teacher if people think that needs external advice. There'll be some external role as well.
I think there will be a need for some external moderation. Again, the assessment industry in other forms of exams and qualifications, for example, is well used to doing remote assessments. There's obviously a role potentially for technology. These are the sorts of options that we've been working up with ministers and officials behind the scenes, and I do feel confident we can move swiftly on that.
Just because people are hungry for answers, and I know, these are very difficult times. When you say move swiftly, I know you're about to go and have a conversation with Ofqual, the exam body, and others. Do you think we'll have the answers by the end of today, or may it take a while yet?
I think we can move very swiftly in the coming days. Okay. Obviously, the department's under extreme pressure at the moment on a range of educational issues. This is just one of them.
I need to move swiftly, if I may, to Alistair Jarvis, Chief Executive of Universities UK. Would you at the universities be happy with that sort of assessment?
Yes, universities will do absolutely all they can to support students to allow them to enter university for the new academic year. What I'd say is that if you're holding an offer from a university and due to start in the autumn, then please don't worry. This is a live conversation and decisions are going to be made very quickly. We'll find a way to make this work, and so students can start university and continue with their education. I can say a little bit more about two of the primary options that we're discussing with government, if you think that would be helpful.
Yeah, so let's go for as much clarity as we can and a little jargon, which is what I think people are wondering is, will the young people have to sit any further form of test or exam, or will you simply be relying on what they've already done?
So, well, as Tom has already said, if an appropriate way can be found to assess students, perhaps a combination of teacher assessment, assignments, work that's already been done, then awards could be granted this summer, grades could be granted this summer, and this would allow students to get their grades and the university admissions process to go ahead this summer. But there is another option, and that's that universities honour the offers that have already been made. Universities, of course, have people who are very experienced about making admissions judgments, and the offers have already been given, considering prior attainment, predicted grades, personal statements, references.
Just to be clear what you mean, it is possible, you've not decided yet, but it is possible that young people might be told, if we offered you a place, you've now got that place, regardless, you're in, it's an unconditional offer.
That is possible, and of course that would be a good option to immediately remove the uncertainty for students. And these offers will have been made making quite nuanced judgments, looking at prior attainment, predicted grades, personal statements, references. And these are things that universities have looked very carefully at already.
So for people who say, well, hold on, that's awful grade inflation, we don't want that, you're stopping young people learning, just a brief answer if you could.
Well, come on, these are unprecedented times. Universities need to be flexible, and they'll do all they can to support students to allow them to progress to university.
Alistair Jarvis of Universities UK, Tom Buick of the Federation of Awarding Bodies, thank you both. And of course, the BBC is going to bring you that information as soon as we have it. By the sounds of it, you'll get clarity in the next few days.
The time now is 3 minutes to 8, and time for a look at the weather. Sarah Keith-Lucas is here. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Martha. Well, certainly a day of very mixed fortunes out there today. Across the northern half of the UK, really, we've got largely clear skies, quite a cold start to the day, whereas further south there's a very stubborn, slow-moving weather front, which is going to be lingering around not just through today, but also into tomorrow as well. So let's start off across all of southern England, Wales, the Midlands and eastern England. Well, here you're sat underneath that weather front, so a cloudy start to the day, reasonably mild, so it's not frosty, but a bit of a breeze around and some drizzly rain as well. The heaviest of the rain, I think, will be across parts of South Wales into the West Midlands as well. Drizzly, light, patchy rain elsewhere. The rain should start to ease away from the southeast later on this afternoon, but really quite a damp grey story and highs around 7 to 9 degrees. Elsewhere, that's all of northern England, Scotland and Northern Ireland. It's a cold, frosty morning. We've had temperatures below freezing for a few spots, but actually we're expecting a dry day with lots of blue sky, lots of sunshine and light winds too. There are a few showers around, dotted across Northern Ireland and Northern England, and for Scotland, just 1 or 2 wintry flurries over the highest ground too, but the showers very few and far between, so most places predominantly dry, and across the northern half of the UK, highs around 8 to 10 degrees. Another cold night in the north tonight with a frost, milder under that blanket of cloud, and tomorrow is a very similar day to today.
Sarah, thank you. Let's look ahead to Saturday night here on BBC Radio 4.
At the beginning of The Outsider, Merceau's mother dies. Existentialism on screen. Immediately after the funeral, he takes his girlfriend swimming, and they go to a comedy film.
Why are movie makers drawn to existentialism's focus on the individual?
Very mainstream films, things like Indecent Proposal. You know, would you let your wife sleep with Robert Redford for $1 million?
Matthew Sweet searches for meaning.
We've got to choose a bunch of films to show that existentialist ideas are present in cinema.
Lights, camera, in action. An existential guide to the movies on BBC Radio 4 on Saturday evening at 8.
In the next hour, the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown on what we should be doing to save thousands of jobs. The head of World Athletics, Seb Coe, after calls by the gold medalist Matthew Pinsent to not go ahead with the Olympics this summer, and the BBC Director General, Tony Hall.
You're listening to Today with Martha Carney and Nick Robinson. Good morning, it's 8 o'clock on Thursday the 19th of March. The headlines this morning: ministers are being asked to answer urgent questions about exam cancellations in England and Wales amid fears that students will lose out because of the coronavirus. The number of military personnel on standby is being doubled to 20,000 to help the police and medics tackle the pandemic. Public transport in London is being reduced and people are being urged to free up remaining services for critical workers. And the 4 times Olympic gold medalist Sir Matthew Pinsent has told this programme that this summer's Olympics should not go ahead. The BBC News is read this morning by Susan Ray.
Schools and universities are calling for urgent clarity about the cancellation of GCSEs and A-levels in England and Wales because of the coronavirus pandemic. Universities UK said it was vital that the move didn't result in pupils missing the opportunity to go on to higher education. The National Association of Head Teachers said there were more questions than answers. This report from Simon Jones.
Schools across the UK will close tomorrow indefinitely. Exams in England and Wales won't go ahead, with decisions due in Scotland and Northern Ireland. The Education Secretary for England, Gavin Williamson, said he wanted to provide parents, staff and pupils with what he called the certainty they needed. But it's left them asking how children will be assessed if there are no formal tests. The National Association of Head Teachers said there were many complicated issues that needed addressing immediately, and Universities UK has called for urgent clarity. The government said it would work with exam boards to ensure that students would get the qualifications that they needed. Some schools will remain open with skeleton staffing to look after the children of key workers such as NHS staff, the police and delivery drivers, and pupils considered to be vulnerable. But the NSPCC is warning that those at risk of abuse can be difficult to identify.
The government is doubling the number of military personnel who are on standby in response to the crisis to 20,000. They'll be ready to assist civil authorities such as the police and the health service as part of what's being called a COVID support force. More details from our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale.
The MOD describes it as prudent planning, and as yet there's been no request that would see troops out on the streets. But they are ready to assist the police, health and prison services if required. So far, the MOD's response has been limited. It's placed dozens of military liaison officers to work alongside government departments and local authorities to assist with contingency planning. The immediate focus is on targeted help. 150 troops are being trained to drive oxygen tankers to supply hospitals if needed, though many military doctors and nurses are reservists who are already working in the NHS. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace said the armed forces were now dedicated to getting the nation through this global pandemic.
People are being urged not to use public transport in London for anything other than essential journeys to free up the network for critical workers. Transport for London has announced that from today it's starting to reduce tube, bus and overground services. When asked at a news conference about putting London in a state of lockdown, the Prime Minister suggested the possibility of further and faster measures in the future. Here's our political correspondent, Jessica Parker.
Yesterday, Boris Johnson didn't rule out bringing in further restrictions in London, where the virus has spread most rapidly. Then, last night, Transport for London announced a reduction in services across the network, with up to 40 tube station closures. TfL said critical workers like medics and police must still be able to move around the city. Meanwhile, the government's set to introduce emergency legislation in Parliament today. Powers range from allowing the urgent registration of retired or soon-to-qualify nurses and paramedics, suspending port or airport operations and reducing the number of doctors required to detain someone under mental health law. The government says the measures will only be used when necessary and have a time limit of 2 years. But Labour's calling for a fresh vote on the legislation every 6 months.
Gas and electricity suppliers have agreed an emergency package with the government to protect vulnerable customers. People with a prepayment meter who aren't able to leave home to top up their cards will be able to speak to their supplier to find a solution. Any energy customer in financial distress will get help with payments, and there will be a halt to disconnections of standard energy meters. The government is being urged to help workers facing drops in income as they're put on unpaid leave or lose their jobs. The Resolution Foundation think tank, which focuses on people on lower incomes, is calling for a new benefit to be created. Our economics correspondent Andy Verity explains.
Amid forecasts that the economy will shrink by between 10 and 20% in the second quarter of this year, there's no doubt that unemployment will jump and many thousands will be put on unpaid leave. Workers will go from wages averaging £512 per week to statutory sick pay at £94 a week, or benefits such as job seekers allowance or universal credit, which pay just £59 a week if you're a single adult under 25 and £74 if you're older. This morning, the Resolution Foundation is urging the government to prevent that income shock worsening the economic damage by creating a new benefit modelled on statutory maternity pay. At a cost of £8 billion, statutory retention pay could pay 1 million workers 2/3 of their normal income with a minimum of £151 a week, retaining the link with their employers so they could return to work when the shutdown ends.
Asian markets have fallen again because of COVID-19. At one point, the leading share indexes in Shanghai and Hong Kong both dropped more than 3%. Trading in South Korea was briefly suspended when its market dropped by more than 8%. China has recorded no new domestic case of the coronavirus for the first time since the pandemic began in the city of Wuhan late last year. China's National Health Commission said 34 new cases had been confirmed, but they were people who came from abroad. More from our correspondent in Beijing, Stephen McDonnell.
If official figures here are to be believed, the coronavirus emergency continues to improve in China. In Wuhan, the worst-hit city where the outbreak started, residents are being allowed outside of their homes for the first time in a month and a half. However, the process will be staggered and people must stay close to where they live. According to China's official count, there's been not a single new homegrown infection in all of the country over the past 24 hours. The dozens of new cases today have all been from overseas arrivals, many of whom are Chinese citizens returning home.
The four-time Olympic gold medal winning rower Sir Matthew Pinsent has said the Games this summer in Tokyo should not go ahead because of COVID-19. Sir Matthew said it was unfortunate that the International Olympic Committee was still insisting the Games should go ahead when so many other large-scale sporting events around the world had been cancelled because of the pandemic. He told this programme that the Games should be postponed or cancelled.
I just don't think there's much of a choice at this stage. For most of the European countries as well as Asian countries, organised sport in any meaningful way has ceased, and that's from government advice. I don't see there's any way forward for an Olympic athlete to train effectively. I think it's unfair almost for the Olympics to say we're going to carry on, the Olympics are still happening, we are committed to the Olympics in July.
Australia and New Zealand are the latest countries to announce a total travel ban on anyone entering unless they are a citizen or a resident. It comes as Australia's national airline, Qantas, said that it would ground all international flights from later this month and temporarily stand down 2/3 of its workforce. The Emperor and Empress of Japan have postponed their planned state visit to the UK in June due to the pandemic. Buckingham Palace says the Queen has agreed that the trip should be rescheduled in the current circumstances. An independent review examining the causes of the Windrush scandal will be published by the government this morning, a year later than expected. The report was commissioned by the Home Office after thousands of Caribbean migrants, known as the Windrush generation, were wrongfully told they were illegally living in the UK. The report is likely to heavily criticise Home Office immigration policy in the years leading up to the scandal in 2018. The government spending watchdog has found that the collapse of the travel company, Thomas Cook, will end up costing taxpayers at least £156 million. The National Audit Office has warned that the final cost might not be known for some time. Here's our business correspondent, Katie Austin.
The collapse of Britain's oldest holiday provider last September left 9,000 staff out of work and 150,000 customers stranded. This report makes clear the scale of the response and the financial hit absorbed by the taxpayer. In addition to the Department for Transport contributing £83 million towards getting people back home, redundancy and related payments to former employees could exceed £58 million. Some other costs are still not known. The fund travel companies pay into to guarantee financial assistance to atoll-protected passengers has taken an even greater hit. It appears £481 million of repatriation and refund costs will deplete the majority of its available resources. That's more than any previous case.
Katie Ashton reporting. It's 8:10. We've entered the unknown. Every day brings immense changes to our daily lives. Schools being shut with children coming home indefinitely. Exams in jeopardy. People in London facing far tighter restrictions on travel and going out. The number of soldiers on standby has doubled to 20,000. All of this will undoubtedly cause huge damage to the economy, with the threat of companies going out of business and many job losses. Comparisons are being made with the global financial crisis, which was when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister. He joins us now. Good morning.
Good morning.
How would you describe the scale of what the country is facing now?
Unprecedented. I think we've got to recognise that when you have this morning a school closure that leads to an exam crisis, that leads to a childcare crisis, that leads to a crisis for vulnerable children, that we're in unprecedented territory. It's a global medical emergency. After all, nearly 10,000 people have died, 300,000 people infected. It's also a global economic emergency. People think maybe 25 million jobs are going to be lost around the world. And it means that people are doubly afraid. They're afraid of catching the virus or their family members catching the virus, and they're afraid of their livelihoods and their family incomes being lost. And we've got to act on both fronts, and we've got to act domestically, and we've got to act internationally. And I'm interested in what additionally we can now do constructively to deal with the crisis before us.
And we will come on to some of those measures, but I was just interested in your assessment of whether you think that this is you've outlined the gravity of this crisis, but how long do you think it's likely to last? Are we going to see long-term consequences as we did from the financial crisis?
I think there's going to be long-term consequences in the way we live our lives. If I'm taking the medical advice properly, I think they think it's probably at its peak within 2 months, perhaps coming down within 4 months. They worry that it may reoccur, so we've got to take measures to do that. I think in this kind of situation where you've got both a medical and an economic emergency, you've got to act quickly, you've got to get to the root of the problem, and you've got to be decisive and use overwhelming resolve to get to the bottom of what you're trying to do. And I think at the moment we are facing quite a big decision about employment. If we have one wave of redundancies in tourism, airport, travel, restaurants, hotels, it will inevitably lead to a second wave of big redundancies where small businesses are affected, people can't afford to buy things, worklessness means that people just don't have money to spend. And I think this is the week where the government has to act to deal with employment protection. We've given companies loans. We've given relief on rents and mortgages, but what people are worried about is their income. In fact, Boris Johnson, if he tells people to go home and stay at home, he's got to tell them how they are going to be able to survive financially if that's the case. And I think what's missing in this country is what's happened in other countries, and that is employment protection measures where we take the key sectors of the economy, know that they're going to be running down if we do nothing about it, make our loans and help conditional on doing something about employment protection. It's really a sharing of responsibility between employers and government. Now, if we could do something on that.
Are you saying that
if we could do something on that?
Sorry to interrupt. Just for clarification, are you saying that then employers shouldn't be able to have government loans unless they promise not to lay off workers?
No, I'm happy that employers are getting loans and getting credit and there's rates relief. I'm happy also that there's grants being given to them. But we've got to have some sharing of responsibility about employment. If people are being asked to stay at home, they need to know about their incomes. If people are worried about the childcare and having to stay home because of that, they need to know whether they can go back to their jobs. If people are on short time, they need to know what sort of income they got. Statutory sick pay, universal credit have got to be improved, obviously, but that's not enough. We've got to have workers who can go back to work when this is over, and companies, as the Governor of the Bank of England in his first remarks said yesterday, I've got to say the first reaction is is not to fire people and sack people. The first reaction must be see how can we keep people on, and that's a shared responsibility between the government and business. And my fear is that we have not done enough to do that, while other countries, you go right through Europe, other countries have been making provision for this. We have yet to do so.
The Chancellor, Rishi Sunak, said yesterday that he was absolutely alive to the urgency of this, and that they're looking at a number of different mechanisms, and it's the question of how you do it. I mean, one idea that's being mooted is a kind of reverse national insurance. So in other words, instead of people paying that form of tax, they would be getting money back from the government. Do you think that would work?
Well, that might work better. That might work better for small businesses. I think in the end you've got to deal with the sectors that are most at risk. And as I say, if you have one wave of redundancies, you're inevitably going to have a second wave if you've not done something to avoid the first wave. When the Governor of the Bank of England spoke yesterday, he was urgent in what he was suggesting. I'm urgent in what I'm suggesting. I think they should get together with the sector. I'm glad the trade unions and employers are both involved in this, and they should agree, whether it's the Denmark scheme or the Swedish scheme or the Norwegian scheme, or whether it's what the Germans are doing, but something has got to be done to get an agreement between the sectors and the government to keep people in work, and even if they're on short term, to protect as much of their income as possible.
What has been done in the United States?
About whether they...
What has been done in the United States, both under the Obama government and now under President Trump, is to give checks directly to people, which has the advantage of being simple and speedy.
But it's scattergun, because President Trump doesn't need a check. American millionaires don't need a check. People in secure jobs who are necessary and are going to be kept on don't really need that check. Who needs the check?
Well, a lot of people do need that check, and they'll get it, and they could get it immediately. We've been hearing from a lot of people in the programme who say they need money now.
Yeah. Well, I listened and I heard the three people on the programme earlier, Andrew, Kate and Greg, and I think in each of their case, what they need to know is that there is employment protection for people in jobs, and that they are in a position then to rely on income still being forthcoming to them, because people are in jobs, they're able to commission work, they're able to use their services. You need to have this security. You see, it's all in the end, as I found in the financial crisis, about building confidence that you're in control of the problem to make people secure. The reason that the markets are falling heavily is that nobody feels that there is leadership in the world at the moment to deal with this, and of course that needs international as well as domestic action.
There has been a fair amount, though, hasn't there, of international intervention. We've seen central bank all over the world cutting interest rates.
Not of the scale that's needed, otherwise there would be more confidence in what needs to be done. And I'm not wanting to criticise anyone, I want to be constructive, but I would say there is to be a meeting of the G20, perhaps it should be combined with the UN Security Council because of the health implications. That has to have an agenda. There's got to be a coordinated fiscal stimulus. There isn't one at the moment. Monetary policy, interest rate cuts can only take us so far. Creating credit can only take us so far. There needs to be a coordinated fiscal stimulus as we did in 2008. Unfortunately, China will not play the part it played in 2008, so Europe and America will have to step up. There needs to be coordinated cooperation on medical equipment, for example, where some countries are producing things that other countries need, and
on
a coordinated,
the
by the way, coordinated action on dealing with a vaccine. I think the coordination's got to go across the board. Fiscal stimulus, yes.
On the question of fiscal stimulus, the European Central Bank has overnight launched an emergency £700 billion package to try to ease
That's
the
not
impact.
Fiscal stimulus. No, Martha, that's not fiscal stimulus. That's them being prepared to stand by institutions and to provide credit. It's governments that really have got to step in here. The central banks can do so much, but governments have got to offer to spend what money is necessary, obviously, to build up the healthcare system in Britain. I mean, obviously, we're short of equipment, we're short of ventilators, we're short of respirators, we're short of staff. That's got to be done. But also governments have got to step in, and employment protection or safeguarding employment seems to me to be the first thing that they need to do now to avert a second and third wave of redundancies, which would be very, very damaging for our economy.
We saw the Chancellor announcing £350 billion of support for businesses, mostly in the form of loans, but they have been talking about further steps too. How much more money do you think might be necessary?
Well, his fiscal package, that is the money he's pumping into the economy, was something in the order of 20 billion, and that was in the form of grants and rate reliefs and tax reliefs. I think he will have to do considerably more to deal with the issues of employment protection. He says he'll do more, but the package should be out now to avoid redundancies being forced upon companies over the next day or two. I think a lot of company directors will be looking at the moment to how many staff they're going to shed in the next few days, in the next few weeks, and I think we need to step in now with building the confidence that we can keep people in work or keep people on short-term in work, or we can have an arrangement with people where they take some holidays, but at the same time they are going to have some income protection. If families don't have income protection, then lots of other consequences follow. People try to work if they're sick, people put themselves at risk, then their health becomes an issue of public health, and I think we really have to step in to deal with this particular blockage at the moment, and I hope
as you've outlined,
before the end of tomorrow.
As you've outlined, and we're also seeing a lot of concern about what's happening in London. It seems a third of the cases already happening in the capital, and we're seeing a lot of the public transport system being shut down. Do you think that is necessary? Do you think it needs to go further?
I think it is necessary. Personally, I think we should have acted a bit more quickly, but that's a matter on which I don't have the full information. I think people have got to accept that at certain points, as we've done before, we bring in the army to help us in certain respects. I'm not advocating greater legal sanctions, but I am advocating using all the resources of this country. There's some amazing incidents where people have been helping each other. There was a shop nearby where I stay, which has offered all the elderly people, and to deliver it, all the sanitation products that are needed free of charge, while others are profiteering. And I think the community wants to come together. The young are clearly more economically insecure, but more medically protected, but the older people are more medically vulnerable and perhaps more economically secure. And so it's all of us together, all of us coming in to make that effort. But of course the government has got to take the right steps, and it's got to get them in the right sequence.
You said that you thought that action should have been taken earlier, particularly in regards to London. Why is that?
I think we had a week when there was conflicting medical advice, if you put it like that, and obviously we can look at that at different occasions, and I really don't want to go back on this. What I want to do is look at what constructively we as a nation can do together, but I do stress this is a global problem. It's not just a national problem. It needs global action and not simply national action. We've had too much of America first, India first, China first. We have had too much of this populist nationalism. We're finding that we're connected whether we like it or not. We're finding that we depend on each other whether we like it or not. And I think people have got to put aside the differences they have, and international cooperation is absolutely vital to this. It's absolutely vital to finding a vaccine and then manufacturing it quickly. It's absolutely vital, obviously, to keep the economy moving. And if you don't have confidence that people are in control, that people know what they're doing and are getting on with it, then all the other consequences that we've seen will follow.
The Prime Minister made clear yesterday that he did intend to carry on with his timetable for Brexit. He talked about the legislation being in place. Do you think that is still possible?
Well, by the end of this year, the big issue will be how can you restore trade. It will be not how you can build more barriers. It's going to be how you can get the world economy moving. And it doesn't seem to me to make sense to be talking about more tariffs at a time when actually we will be trying to rebuild the links and the global supply chains and the connections between different countries. So I think the government's got to consider that. But for the moment, I think they've got to concentrate on getting control of this epidemic.
And finally, on a personal note, you will be concerned about your family, as so many people are around the country.
Yes, and I think you've got to take the human aspect of this into account. You know, I've come across people who are in tears because they're losing their jobs. I've come across mothers who don't know where they're going to be able to feed their children and how. We've got local food banks that I'm talking to in my own area where I used to be the Member of Parliament, and they don't know how they're going to cope. All of us have got to come together. There's amazing resilience on the part of the community. What we need is to back the willingness of people to do things and to cooperate with the measures that can help them make this more effective. And you've got now, I think, to deal with this question of employment, and then I think you've got to deal next week with the international cooperation that's essential. There is going to be a meeting of the G20, and that's going to be made to be more than just a token forum.
Gordon Brown, former Prime Minister, thank you for joining us.
We're going to be hearing from Gavin Williamson, the Secretary of State for Education, just after 8:30. The time now is coming up to 8:25. We have a special role to play at this time of national need. So says the Director General of this organisation of the BBC. Tony Hall is in the studio, and a reflection, Tony, of the problems that you have doing your normal job, let alone an extraordinary job, as I'm talking to you from home this morning.
Good morning, Nick. I know, and that just shows you how we're working to be as resilient as we can to make sure we can sustain the services we're offering the British public at this really, really difficult time.
Begin with that, if you could, before you tell us what you want to do for people. I mean, Broadcasting House is empty compared with a normal day. You've had to make changes to take certain dramas off air, certain news programmes, just to keep what you think is the core output going.
Yes, I mean, we've been making, proper decisions to focus on what is our core mission, what we are paid to do for the British public. We all need to pull together. We need to use all our available resources to inform, educate and entertain. And the great and powerful thing about the BBC at a crisis like this is we are both international, national and local. We're both linear in the sense of having stations like Radio 4, and we also have a huge online reach as well. So what we are working through every single day is how we can maintain and sustain those services on behalf of the British public at a time of unprecedented issues that we're all facing.
Well, given that it's hard for the BBC, for any broadcaster, to make much new output, certainly not new drama and the rest, given the limitations, people might assume that you're just going to do what sometimes you're accused of doing, which is stuff the schedule's full of repeats. Now, fashionably, we call those box sets now. They're quite fashionable to do. What can people expect from
Well, first of all, on informing, I can't underscore enough the importance of the programmes like this one and the programmes on BBC One, but there too we're making some changes. Coronavirus podcast, which is going to give you daily information, rather like Brexitcast did, in an informal way. Health Check UK Live on BBC Two to keep us healthy and we hope in a good state. And an issue I particularly like is using our local radio stations in a scheme to make a difference, which is saying how can we use our local radio networks to help people in the community, to help communities support each other, the vulnerable people, to solve issues. And I think that's going to be really important. But as you say, I and others keep getting little things on our phones and social media of amusing stories. And I think the other important role throughout of all this is also to keep the nation entertained, so that there will be more box sets, Spooks, The Missing, Waking, and French and Saunders, for example. And also I can say, talking to the controller of this esteemed station, that The History of the World in 100 Objects is going to come back on Radio 4. In times of crisis, we all need a Neil McGregor.
So more information, help with exercise, help with parents who want to keep their kids learning. But the thing that I know is particularly close to your heart is culture.
Yes.
At a time when all live entertainment has closed down, is the BBC able to reach out to the dramatists, to the actors, to the concert goers, to the musicians themselves? Can you get some of that on air live?
We are hoping so. We've come up with an initiative, talking to the Arts Council England and other bodies as well, which we're calling Culture in Quarantine. And the idea there is to see how we can work with museums, galleries, performing groups, theatres, whatever, to see whether we can get some of their work to the public that would like to go to them, but obviously can't because of what's happening at the moment. And those talks are going on, and I really hope that the inventiveness of the brilliant staff of the BBC, but also the inventiveness of our arts and our creative sector can come up with something there which would be really, really important.
Now, for our older listeners and viewers, they knew that unless they were on the right benefit, they were going to have to pay the licence fee for the first time in a long time. That's for people over 75 who are not on pension credit. You've delayed that, haven't you, from June to August. it doesn't look all that likely the crisis will be over by then. Is there a chance of delaying again?
The board met virtually, I add, on Sunday to take that decision to put the implementation off to August, and the phrase is under review. I think on all of this, in terms of, actually, I suspect all the lives of our listeners today, and certainly the lives of everyone in the BBC at the moment, each day sufficient to each day. You know, we must just keep doing what we think is right each day and keep everything under review.
Tony Hall, Director General of the BBC, thanks for joining us.
The time now is 29 minutes past 8, and Gary's here with the sport.
Good morning to you. Virtually all sport, of course, is off all over the world, but the International Olympic Committee say the Games in Tokyo will go ahead as planned. Sir Matthew Pinsent won 4 Olympic gold medals. I spoke to him earlier. He has this message for the IOC.
I just think there are bigger things to worry about at this stage. On a global front, we have other priorities, and I think the Olympics should at the very least be saying we should postpone, or indeed we should just cancel at this stage and we'll talk about postponement later on. The idea that the Olympics are going to carry on regardless, I think, is folly.
Sebastian Coe is president of World Athletics. He's also chairman, of course, of London 2012, largely responsible for bringing the Olympics to this country. Sebastian Coe, good morning to you.
Good morning, Gary.
You talk regularly to Thomas Bach, the president of the IOC. Indeed, you spoke to him in the last 24, 36 hours. What is he now thinking? Give us an insight, if you would.
Well, I joined a meeting.
The Today programme continues on FM, but here on Radio 4 Longwave, on digital radio and on BBC Sounds, it's time for Yesterday in Parliament with me, Susan Hume. So, good morning from Westminster. Coming up between now and 9, more dramatic news as the government closes schools across Britain to stop coronavirus. Also, how a lack of available tests mean police officers are having to self-isolate, perhaps needlessly. And what's caused the scarcity of hormone replacement therapy? Peers are told it's been a series of unfortunate events. Well, another day, another seismic announcement in the fight to stop the spread of coronavirus.
After schools shut their gates on Friday afternoon, they will remain closed until further notice. This will be for all children, except to those of key workers and children who are most vulnerable.
The Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, who's responsible for English schools, although the closure is happening across the UK. No exams will take place this summer. It's a step the government had wanted to stave off for as long as possible, but
the spike of the virus is increasing at a faster pace than anticipated, and it is crucial that we continue to consider the right measures to arrest this increase and to relieve the pressure on the health system.
A statement with such far-reaching effects triggered a lot of questions, not all of which had clear answers yet. Speaking for Labour, Angela Rayner asked about those cancelled exams.
There is widespread concern around the exams. Clarity is required about pupils who are due to sit their SATs, the GCSEs and A-levels, and will now not do so. Can you tell us when decisions will be made